In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
It is 100% real.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Curious Dimension podcast, where we explore the mysteries of the unknown, delve into the fascinating world of UFO disclosure, sacred geometry, crop circles, and more. I am your host, Matt Baroa. I hope that you've been enjoying the conversations as much as I have been hosting them. Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us reach more curious minds like yours. And if you want to stay updated with all our latest episodes, be sure to hammer that subscribe button. You won't want to miss any of the exciting discussions we have lined up. Finally, we love hearing from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's episode or any questions you might have. Feedback means the world to me. It helps shape future content. So today we have back on the show UFO activist Steve Bassett. We just had Steve on the show a few weeks back to prepare us for the upcoming UAP Congressional hearings that took place last Wednesday, November 13th. I wanted to have Steve back on again because he was in the room during the witness testimony of those congressional hearings. And I thought it would be a good idea to get his perspective on what the whole experience was like, as well as where he sees this process of UFO disclosure going. As always, Steve is a wealth of information, and it's always a pleasure to hear him speak. So let's get right into it. Here's Steve Bassett. All right, Steve, welcome back to the show. Really appreciate you coming back on again on short notice. We did have you on here about 3 weeks ago, and we were talking about the upcoming UAP congressional hearings that took place last week, Wednesday, November 13th. And as we record this today, Wednesday, November 20th, you were in the room. And I really wanted to have you back on to get your thoughts. I also did catch your talk that you gave after the hearings in the field with Danny Sheehan and Robert Salas. So I wanted to get your overall take on that. First, how are you doing this morning?
I'm showing my age. The last 7 or 8 days have probably been the most intense in quite some time. I've done 20 interviews, averaging 2 hours an interview. So that's 40 hours of interviews since the 12th. I had to get up at 3:45 a.m. on the day of the interview. I'm exhausted. I love it, right? But I'm not a young man anymore. I've got 4 or 5 more interviews scheduled. I've got a huge amount of computer work to do, and I've got to relaunch my website. So I am feeling fantastic. Why? Because I'm an activist, and everything that's going on is about the work I've been involved in and my colleagues have been involved in. So these are extraordinary times. It is really hard to stress how extraordinary they are. I know a little bit about history, mostly from documentaries, but I know some history, and there have been some interesting times in history. I'm not sure if many of them can compare with this. We are in a place that is really hard to describe when you factor in the fact that we're approaching World War III, that it's going to involve nukes of some kind, that we're approaching confirmation of the extraterrestrial presence in our world, that we have technological trends which are almost inconceivable from 40 years ago, and there was the rise of AI. You take these things together, and it's hard to find something that compares with it. Everything is changing, and everything is about to change even more. I hope that their parents do the best they can to inform them and give them a sense of where things are going, because the world that they're going to grow up in is not going to resemble the world I grew up in, not even close. So this is intense stuff. We all hope it all ends well, as every major historical change and paradigm shift has taken place, but there's no guarantee of that.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick second to thank everybody who's been tuning into the shows. If you haven't already hit that like button or hammered that subscribe button, please do that now. It really helps the algorithm to let this show reach a wider audience. And yeah, please leave me a comment in the bottom. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Much love, guys.
Yeah, I was born in 1978, and I feel like there were some small dramatic technological changes from the time I was born until the time I graduated high school in 1998. But it's just gone into ludicrous speed here in the last decade.
At ludicrous speed, yes.
To quote Spaceballs, it is really out of hand with the technological advancements, artificial intelligence. Like you said, the possibility of a tactical nuke strike, which is a very real threat. If people don't think that's a possibility, you need to start paying attention a little bit more. And then, of course, disclosure, which is
Right.
a massive shift in the way people will perceive how they fit into this world, into this solar system, galaxy, universe. So there are some deep truths and deep understandings that are coming out. But I really wanted to talk about the congressional hearings because you were in the room, along with Jim Garrison and many others that are spearheading a very wise and understood disclosure of this. So I wondered if you could just maybe tell me what was it like to be in that room? What did you think of the witnesses? And tell me your thoughts.
Okay. This was the second hearing in 16 months directly engaging this subject, which included references to non-human tech, non-human biology, non-human biologics, and so forth, meaning extraterrestrials and crash vehicles. Prior to these two hearings, it was 55 years ago that we had hearings on this, just two, half day, nothing like this. I don't even know if there was an audience in the hearing room. It's in 68. One of them was spurred on by Congressman Gerald Ford from Michigan because a very significant sighting occurred in Michigan. And he was a righteous, honest man, good man. And he thought, well, we need to have a hearing about that. So the Air Force, I'm sure, didn't want to. The Department of Defense didn't want to, but he was an important, powerful congressman. So they had that hearing in 66. They had another hearing in 68. It's not clear why they held it, but there was still a lot of pressure on this issue. They brought in some high-level people to address it for about a half a day. And I don't think it was a coincidence that not long after that, we learned that they were shutting down Blue Book. The Condon report came out from University of Colorado saying there's nothing there. And then NICAP exploded. The major organization at the time, not the first, but the most important, had at one time 15,000 members. It had military and intelligence people, academics. It was a serious organization intent on approving and studying this thing, which of course was not what the Department of Defense wanted. And so they destroyed that. That was then. 55 years later, the culmination of a lot of effort that really begins in October of 2017, which I like to call the beginning of the end game of this chess game. Chess game's been going on for 77 years. Like all games, it has to end. And that end game, this is referred to, begins in 2017. That it's been moving forward steadily, but it has been slowed down by extraordinary events around the world, such as a pandemic that killed millions and millions of people, cost trillions of dollars, that upended the economies of major nations. A new war in Europe that's perhaps the most dangerous. There have been a number of skirmishes. I guess you could say this is almost a world war because it has Russian troops, North Korean troops, Ukrainian troops. It has U.S. mercenaries, and of course, a lot of weapons for 4 or 5 other countries. If that's not a world war, we're close. That's happening. We have extraordinary political upheaval. We just had an absolute re-explosion in the Middle East of a conflict that seems to no end. And one of the entities involved in that Middle East conflict may already have nuclear weapons or they're about to get them. So that's pretty intense. So the extraterrestrial issue has continued to advance in spite of all that over the 7 years, ultimately leading to a hearing last year, a hearing this year, and there's been at least 4 or 5 briefings over the last 7 years involving Congress. Not a hearing, but briefings in which staffers came up to give an update to certain members of Congress. So, from my perspective, these hearings look a certain way. From the perspective of the average person, another way. And for certain of the researchers and many in the field, another way. I can only give my perspective. And it's based upon how all of this is fitting into that chess game, that end game, the moves that are being made and where they're going, right? I see them in that context. If you take them out of that context, a lot of it doesn't make sense at all. So we had a hearing last year in 55 years. It was pretty extraordinary because it involved extraordinary testimony from an individual inside working for the UAP task force who brought forward information provided in by somebody in a unidentified special access program. And it came out because this individual went public. You could say that he was a whistleblower. I think that's a fair assessment. Not all of them are. David Grush. And this was a shock to the system. There's no question. And so that hearing was held before a House subcommittee. It was packed. It was well covered. It generated a very substantial amount of press. There were two other witnesses accompanying David Grush, but this hearing was all about Grush, without question. A lot happened over the next 16 months, to say the least. And then we had the second hearing. This hearing is in the House, as before, the same basic subcommittee, which points out that there is a defined effort within the House of Representatives to address this issue. It's not the only effort, but there is a defined effort. And in between the two hearings, the House formed the first caucus, the first UAP caucus in history, which is now slowly gathering members. And while in between these two hearings, an extraordinary election campaign took place. So this hearing is very different from the last. This hearing is not about a single witness coming forward with extraordinary testimony. This is a hearing in which, again, the oversight subcommittee, in this case led by Representative Mace, the last one was Representative Burchett, brought together 4 witnesses, pretty much equal, right? Not with some sort of extraordinary piece of technology or information, rather, that would excite everybody. No, that's not what it was. And that's what disappointed a lot of people. They wanted under David Grush. Didn't get that. But they put together 4 substantive people who have a great deal of knowledge about this subject, that had different backgrounds, highly accomplished, respected, and so forth. And 4 of these people then read their testimony and then took questions. Notably, it was the first time that Luis Elizondo, who has been one of the leaders of the disclosure process, finally gets to testify. And the end result of this was that if you are a politician or a editor, journalist, publisher, if you are an academic, and you're watching this, and a lot of people did watch this, what you're seeing is 4 highly skilled people giving you testimony about what they think and know about this, and it overlaps and reinforces each other. And that is the kind of thing that penetrates individuals, very serious individuals that have to make decisions about what they're going to do about this subject. And that made it very important. Elizondo, of course, is notable, starts right off. The very first words that come out of his mouth are, "We are not alone." Right? We have a presence, and so forth. And obviously you can read his testimony. It's up on the web. Others are doing the same. We have non-human tech. We have non-human bodies, and so forth. He just gets that right out of the way. Boom. And then he goes on with his testimony, and everybody knows that he is a very significant person in this issue and has given a lot of presentations. It's been a complex ride for him because he's been engaging social media relentlessly and taking a lot of hits. And then we had testimony from Rear Admiral Gallaudet, a very accomplished individual who has been courageous enough to step forward and lend his gravitas to this. And then we had testimony from a journalist. This is the first time a journalist has ever given testimony on this issue under oath. Schellenberger, a serious investigative journalist. And then a gentleman, Mike Gold, with a varied career, many stations, including dealing with space, NASA, and so forth. And so you add it all together, they covered a lot of territory, and it was very important. Also, to add to flavor here, panel was larger than last time. There were 12 members, House members, speaking to this. 9 Republican, 3 Democrats. There were 2 Democrats that were there last time that weren't here this time, and I think I know why. But I think the election was over, so I think it was a little easier for those to participate. Leading into the election, not so easy. So that was substantive. The room was packed. They had as many people in that room as they could get. They took the stadium seating out, which was cool because you were sitting up and you got seen really nicely by the cameras. And they went to floor seating, but they added more chairs. It was packed. One of the most important things about this particular hearing is that as this issue continues to attract more and more attention, quite a few entities live streamed it. I'm going to try to find out how many and put the links up to that. C-SPAN filmed it. I think they did the same last time, but I'm not sure. But a number of platforms, news platforms, live stream this to the world. So we have no idea how many people actually watched it live, but I'm going to try to get a handle on that and see if I can get at least a number. And of course, the filming of this, the record, the archive of this is now available online. It's not hard to find. And many more are going to see it over the coming weeks and months. So this hearing is going to get spread and seen, I can assure you. So that was important. When the witnesses came in from the back right corner behind the panel, they walked in. The only thing that was missing was that music you get when the NBA guys come on the floor before the game. And they walked in, took a right to take their seats. And as they were doing that, the entire room started applauding. That didn't happen last time. I wondered if it would happen. I was waiting. This will be a marker. They started applauding these witnesses. And everybody watching saw it. And everybody that watches that video later will see it and hear it. And anybody in Congress will see and hear it. Okay. Watch a lot of hearings. Okay. Watch the Ghazi hearings. Watch the Nixon hearings. Watch as many hearings as you can find and see if you can find another hearing where the witnesses came in and if there was a public audience, they applauded them. That was very significant. The energy was sky high. The public interest in this is very serious. There's a lot of hearings on the Hill. There's no line outside. And if it is, it's a lot of stand-ins. People that are standing in for some lobbyist that is paying them $50 an hour so they don't have to wait. And then the lobbyist walks up, takes the place, goes in. There's not a lot of energy. You could walk up and down. They're all bored out of their mind, right? Not this kind. Also, in order to get into that room, you had to get there early. I got there around 5 a.m. And there were already about 26 people there. I had some other people that I brought with me, such as Bob Salas, one of the very important witnesses to hopefully testify. He's 84 years old. So we stood in 33-degree weather from 5 a.m. to 7, 2 hours. There was one person that had been there pretty early that was wrapped up in a sleeping bag, completely wrapped up asleep. That's notable. That we got in. And then they did a more orderly, I think, handling of the line. Last time it was a little crazy, but this time they had it set up. They had those little, what do you call them, stanchions with the ribbons and so forth to keep people. That was cool. And when I got in, my group, we were on 26 to 28, 29, 30. By the time it was time to get in the room, we were around 60. There was, to say the least, a lot of cut-ins. That's not surprising when the energy level is that high and people want in so badly. And then in the hall, where we had to wait for 4.5 hours, energy level. People would walk by, Elizondo and James Fox and others would walk by down the hall on their way to somewhere, and everybody was giving them high fives and wanting their autograph and getting a selfie, and they're all excited. That went on for 4.5 hours. Finally, we get into the room. So this gives you a sense of what this hearing was like. Not all hearings are like that. And it reflects to the Congress in a very visceral way. You want to get behind this issue. You want to get involved. You want to be part of the solution. You want to help get disclosure. So in terms of the testimony, there was nothing really remarkable that stood out, but there were a couple of things, right? And some backstories. One of the most interesting backstories involved Schellenberger. Now, he is first of all, a journalist. He's the first journalist to ever testify before Congress on this issue in the 4 hearings that have been held. There might have been a non-public briefing or something, but no, he's the first one. Why? As Representative Mace was trying to fill out the witness list, she wanted more than one just star witness. They had 3 last time. David Fravor and Ryan Graves were essentially support of Grush. They didn't have that much to say, but they obviously had an event they could address if they wanted to. She wanted more robust witnesses. She wanted at least 4. And she was struggling to get those 4 because it is complicated. She did a good job. Elizondo, of course, was going to testify. Gallaudet had turned up, started saying important things. She got him, God bless him. Again, when you're a rear admiral retired and you're doing this, you're not expanding your post-retirement options. You're going to lose some colleagues and friends, right? That's the way it is. But the people that engage this issue don't care. They're courageous and they know how important this is. She had 2 strong witnesses. She needed more. While she's in that looking mode, this new story drops, which is now common now in this issue. Every couple of weeks, something new is going to drop. And this involved an individual coming forward who had information from an anonymous person. All right, so he's totally secondhand. And this anonymous person had given him either a summary of, or actually was able to show him some absolutely classified documents about a USAP. Again, Rush was giving you secondhand information from an anonymous individual involved in a USAP. This someone coming forward, giving secondhand information to a journalist, right? It comes from an individual who has seen documents maybe provided to him by somebody inside, but it seems like he stumbled on them. So it's actually a little more removed than Grush's testimony, but nevertheless, that doesn't mean it's not substantive. And this gentleman brought this summary of this doc, and probably the unnamed individual, to two journalists, okay, Schellenberger and Coulthard. And that's where the story gets dropped. Now, again, that's important, all right, because they're journalists, and those journalists operate under certain ethical guidelines, which includes not revealing sources. And while you could look, in 10 or 15 years ago, this would look way too fuzzy. We're not going to deal with it, but that was then, not now. We know too much. We've seen too much. And so what we learn is essentially, and we got a very high confidence presentation of an actual USAP by name, Immaculate constellation. Now, there have been the names of USAPs thrown around from time to time by various individuals, but this one was more substantive. Some of those other names might have been valid, might not have been valid, but this one looks solid. We know that Schellenberger certainly made an effort to vet it. I'm certainly that Ross Coulthard made an effort to vet it, News Nation. So it got the attention of everyone, including Representative Mace. So she wanted that anonymous person to come forward, come out from anonymity and speak. It would have been quite a coup. So whatever she was doing to get that person, the Department of Defense got wind of it. And one way or another, she was contacted. She didn't go into how, who, whatever. She's not going to, stating, don't go there. Don't go after that witness. And I believe, if I understand it correctly, she was also told, don't even bring up the program. Don't even say the words Immaculate Constellation.
Really?
Well, speaking in a completely nonpartisan way, Representative Mace is one tough cookie. And she made a statement about that. They didn't want me to do that. And the statement is now the reason why. And I actually said this to her, that I have my own name for her now. And it's a Representative Nancy, come hell or high water, Mace. And so she did engage this issue. And what she was able to do is get Schellenberger, the initial journalist, to come in and testify. That's a first, right? And then Mike Gold was the final witness. And his background was also substantive. So this is a pretty damn good panel. If you are a scientist, an academic, a politician, a news journalist, television journalist, whatever, this is a pretty solid panel. Some people say, no, we wanted more David Gresh's. We wanted I think Representative Mace said she had a lot of people pressuring her. Why can't you get an ET, dead or alive, and wheel him into the room? No, that's not the way it's going to happen. Of the fact that she needed a couple more witnesses for her hearing. And I had already made a maneuver as an activist to try to get a witness into that hearing. She finally found the other two. The witness in this case was Captain Robert Salas, who is relatively well known in the field as one of the nuclear shutdown witnesses or nuclear tampering witnesses. Robert Salas has represented their interest to testify before Congress for almost 30 years. He has made every effort, along with these other witnesses, firsthand witnesses, not secondhand witnesses, to the events when the UAPs would hover over the ICBM facility and the missiles would all shut down. This is probably the single most important piece of our event that we know of with respect to what ETs do. All right. And they've not been able to get an opportunity to testify because the DoD really can't handle it. They don't know what to do.
Just to emphasize this, because I think this is something that I think a lot of people don't understand the significance of the UAP nuclear connection. In my opinion, how ridiculous it is that these guys have not had their time to tell their story. This is, in my mind, probably the most important aspect of what we're dealing with. Do you agree with that?
And it's not so much ridiculous as it is telling. All right. So the truth embargo is based upon stigmatizing the core issue, demeaning it, undermining it, and creating what I call an intellectual ghetto. And if you're really good at doing that, the media will pretty much go along with it, not completely, but it'll go along with it. Academics will go along with it, and so forth. And you're able to contain the issue. And by containing the issue, you are able to prevent it from reaching the level where it gets fully politically engaged, and eventually the president, whoever they are, confirms it to the nation's people. And we are essentially in the post-disclosure world. They have successfully been able to do that now for 77 years, but it hasn't been easy. But they have a lot of money. Just check out the Department of Defense's, the budget for the entire military intelligence complex. Big number. That's just the public number. The private number adds quite a few billions more. So they're well-resourced. A lot of people have come forward over the years. Astronauts, for instance, and others. And they've all been researched. They're in various books. Their testimonies in various books. But the last time anybody had a chance to testify before Congress under oath, which is critical, had been 1968. All right. So in 1994, a group of witnesses came forward. And these were the most significant of all. And again, you have to know a lot about the history of not only the truth embargo, but also the ET activities to understand why it's the most important of all. And so they were present when our nuclear weapons were shut down, not once, but a number of times. How many, we don't know. But we know the first incidences are out. They were out and in the public domain eventually, right? There was even an article, I think, at the time they happened in some local paper that kind of referred to them, but that this got buried. But in 1994, Captain Robert Salas, who was one of the SAC base officers in the silo, in Malmstrom, made the decision to come forward. It wasn't a simple decision. He had sat on it for 30 years, almost 30 years, because he was under an NDA, and he was a righteous Air Force officer, had a full career. He retired. And relatively comfortable life, but this had been eating at him for years. And so what he did was submit a FOIA request to the Air Force to see if he could get some information related to what happened back then. But very cleverly, he did not use UFO or UAP. He did not say it and cast it in that way. He cast it in a way that did not raise that. And to his surprise, he got information back from the Air Force that essentially was clearly referring to something that happened back then. And he interpreted that as clearing him from his NDA. I don't think it did, but it was enough for him to decide to come forward. Once he came forward, it triggered this whole thread that is still with us today. And it resulted in, ultimately, a dozen or more people connected to nuclear shutdowns or nuclear weapons tampering incidents to join with him to try to push this issue forward. It resulted in a major book, UFOs and Nukes, by Robert Hastings, who's still with us. It resulted in a documentary based on that book, all powerful. Bob Salas himself wrote a book, Faded Giant, and two others that relates to this issue. It did generate some news coverage, and I'm about to put out a press or media release with as many links to those articles as possible. In other words, it wasn't completely avoided by the press. They dropped in something from time to time, but not enough to set the issue on fire, okay? And they held press conferences, 2, in which media showed up, but did nothing. They've done everything they can while they got older, and now they're in their 80s, and some of them are dying off. And so this has become a personal matter for me to get this done. All right. So I knew that there was a need for witnesses. And so I essentially, in 2019, the second press conference at the National Press Club was held by Bob Salas. There were a couple of witnesses there. A limited number of press showed up, but I think it was CNN that showed up because they were doing some sort of a doc or a program, and they actually interviewed him off to the side, which is great. If that's what it took to get CNN to do that, fantastic. I think it was CNN. But again, not too many press showed up, but he had a pile of affidavits with him. These are signed affidavits by, I think, 9 nuclear weapons tampering incidents, which includes the Rendlesham Forest case, as well as the Bob Jacobs incident involving the tampering with a nuclear warhead in flight by a craft that was filmed, and then the film was taken by the CIA. So these affidavits were handed out, but there were a lot of leftovers. So Bob gave me all the leftovers, about 50, and I've had them in my office since then, 2019. So what I did was I delivered a set of these affidavits to the key members of the Oversight Committee. And I did this while they were campaigning. This is before the election. The offices were fairly light. I came in, gave them the affidavits with a cover letter and so forth, and said, please present these to the member when the first opportunity. Had my card on it. And then about 5 days later, I mailed the set into a specific individual. The others were hand delivered because I knew it takes about 5 or 6 days to clear all the security where they have to radiate, look for ricin and all the other stuff, because now we live at a different time. So there's 2 sets of physical affidavits that were going to be in their office before the hearing. All right. Thinking it's a possibility that maybe they may say, wait a minute, let's get Bob Salas in here. So as it happened, that it was too late. So they brought in the 2 witnesses, and we held that hearing. So subsequent to that, there have been some developments that I believe have substantially improved the chances of these one or more of these witnesses to finally testify before a committee under oath, and the affidavits of these witnesses will be submitted along with the testimony. And that will be a major milestone event. I should mention that the closest these gentlemen came to testifying under oath was in 2013 at an event that I had produced called the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure. It was a mock congressional hearing at the National Press Club. And they were, along with another, how many witnesses do we have? I think we had 42 witnesses from 10 countries. And they testified to the events of the nuclear shutdowns under a mock oath to a panel of former members of Congress, 6. That's as close as they've got. And that was filmed. And that has been out there since 2013. A lot of people have seen it. All right. But that wasn't enough to get them before the hearing, but it certainly helped to contribute to it. That it gives you a sense of where things are. The 4 witnesses testified. It was very powerful, I believe. And then something else happened that day, notable as the kind of thing you start to expect when an issue is starting to mature. It's starting to get really serious. And that is other entities, some of which are new, just formed recently, in service to ending this embargo, truth embargo, used that hearing as an opportunity to piggyback on it, right? There was a lot of people coming to town, a lot of press involved. Let's piggyback on that. The first one was held 30 minutes after the end of House Subcommittee hearing in a park just next to the building. About 100 people showed up. There was press releases put out. And it was basically about the fact that a new organization called the New Paradigm Institute, which is leading the activist movement, because its key founder is Danny Sheehan, the legendary justice activist who has been involved in nonprofit activism going back 50 years and involved in a number of 501c3 activist organizations, currently the Romero Institute, of which the New Paradigm Institute is a subsidiary. He was there along with representatives from MUFON, the chairman of the board, Dave McDonald, as well as the head of media for MUFON, Ron James. And they were discussing the fact that there is an effort underway for a significant collaboration with the New Paradigm Institute and MUFON. One is new, out in the front of the activist process. The other is much older, going all the way back to 69, more established. They're in a somewhat different line of work, but they're trying to find ways to collaborate to advance the disclosure process. And so that was announced. As it happened, I was also able to speak, and I used my time to introduce Bob Salas to the cameras. And that about 30-minute gathering is also out on the net being seen. So that was a piggyback. All right, no problem. And then later on at 5:30 up on Capitol Hill, a much more, how would you say, high-end meeting took place, sponsored by another brand new organization called the UAP Disclosure Fund, which is the first 501c4 political nonprofit, as opposed to 501c3 charity, meaning that you can donate money to it and get a tax deduction, and they're going to use it for political purposes, all right, within the guidelines of the law. They funded a substantial gathering for witnesses, press, members of Congress, and so forth up on the Hill. And that took place. That was quite a day, and it will be examined. I am logging in the coverage. Some people have been complaining online that where's the coverage? I think I'm up to 100 articles, which is, it takes a long time to do this. So very shortly, I will put up on my website, paradigmresearchgroup.org, in the print media archive, about 100 articles of English language coverage of that hearing, all right, leading up to it and afterwards on the website, okay? I also put up links to as much of the live or recorded a video of the entire thing as I can, so that people will understand that in spite of the fact that we're in the times we are, with an extraordinary political developments and other developments around the world, this issue is not going backwards, it's going forwards. The media is serious, the members of Congress are serious, the public is serious. And so while it's not going to simply completely overcome all of these other things, it's also not going away. And so that was the results of the hearing. Now, then another piggyback event occurred. I don't want to mischaracterize it, but the Senate has also been a major player in this issue. So the House is well established as territory. The individuals who are in front of the issue are well known. Burchett, Luna, Mace, Moskowitz, Garcia, and so forth. In the Senate, it's a little different. The Senate led first. The Senate Intelligence Committee has been the source of all of the legislation that has ultimately been passed. 4 acts or 4 pieces of legislation embedded in larger bills. There's never been any legislation prior to that, 0. Each act or each piece of legislation more comprehensive than the other, culminating in the last bill, which was really big, but got pared back because the empire struck back, which was fully expected. So the Senate has been leading on the legislation side. The Senate has also held a number of briefings, not hearings, but briefings. And this is when they've called people involved in the issue, particularly with UAP Task Force and then ultimately AARO, to come in and just say, what's going on, right? That's good. And they were publicly filmed, and that's out there. But these are briefings, but they've had a number of those. And it's notable, Kirsten Gillibrand, Senator Gillibrand has taken an important role here, established her area of influence. Mark Warner and Rubio were pretty much dealing just with legislation. And then, of course, Schumer, the majority leader, stepped into this, but he's not a member of the committee, but he was currently serving the committee. But it has carried over into the Senate Armed Services Committee. So now you have 2 committees in the Senate that have clearly engaged this issue, and you have 1 committee in the House that have done that. Now, in the Senate, what's interesting, Senator Gillibrand is on the Armed Services Committee and the Intel Committee. And so she's held briefings under the Armed Service Committee aegis. I don't know if she's held a briefing regarding the Intel Committee, but she might have. It may have been the one with Moultrie and Bray. And so she decided to have another briefing. Now, either intentionally or coincidentally, it occurs just, let's see, 13th to the 19th, just 6 days after the major hearing in the House. But it was announced late. And so really nobody really knew about it until late. But this briefing was important for reasons that very few people watching would have known. What she did was she brought in the new AARO director, Kozlowski. Fine man, got a scientific background, he's got an intel background, perfectly qualified to be the director of AARO. And there were some very good reasons that she did that. The most important one was that she was the one that created AARO. She was the one that, in her legislation that she sponsored, set out the new organization to deal with this, replacing the UAP task force. And of course, that it has remained as such. So she created that. And she has had briefings about how it's doing. Lately, hasn't been doing well. AARO is the point of contact, in a sense, on this issue with the government. It has been in a very difficult spot, which gets us into a complicated area, which I will be brief. But without understanding what I'm about to say, you're not going to understand what the hell is going on there with respect to AARO and what just happened. AARO is the entity that is going to be the point of contact for the world on this issue in the post-disclosure world, right? Certainly to the press and everyone else. Not the world, but basically the United States. Let's keep it the United States. It was set up for that purpose. AARO was not set up to be the entity that's finally going to gather all the information together and confirm whether there's an extraterrestrial presence. The Defense Department knows about this presence. The Defense Department has non-human bodies in tech. The Defense Department has spent a fortune tracking this phenomena, dealing with contactees, and is very knowledgeable about this issue. Therefore, what is AARO about? AARO was set up along with everything else in preparation for the president confirming that, in fact, we are not alone, and thus accelerating and truly launching the transfer of the information the government has held now for decades into the public domain. In other words, at some point, everything we know about this subject is going to be made public. That was inevitable, right? But to be fair, whatever the process was in which all that information was coming forward, there would be certain things so sensitive that they'd be the last to come in, but there would be a disclosure, small d, of this to the American people. And the law, the basic laws set that were already in place, though the last one was cut in half, but could be reinstated in full anytime, were in place to do that. The organization that would be the point of contact was created, and other entities were brought into play, meaning NASA, invited in and asked to create a study group, etc. But none of this was to find out what's going on. They already know what's going on. NASA knows what's going on. Every president that has ever served since Truman, including Truman, have known that there is this presence.
Right.
What they chose to do about it is another matter, but they have known. And it's not hard to figure that out, but whatever. So that's what's going on. It is very tough, and I get it. If you are somebody on Capitol Hill, and you may have a UFO library in your basement with 2,000 books, you may have had private meetings going back years. You may have been tipped off by 10 different people. You may have even gone and seen a body like Jackie Gleason, whatever. You're not going to discuss this until it has gotten to the point where you can. And so the number of people in government that have known for a long time that we're not alone, if we ever eventually get a number on that, will stun people. They will say, are you kidding? But again, the classified world, the military intelligence complex, is not trivial. It is extremely substantive, extremely serious. And the number one reason it's so serious is the nuclear arms race. You take that out of the picture, this thing would have leaked all over the place a long time ago. But once you add the nuclear arms race in there, it locks it down. Okay, AARO is the point of contact. And it's had a tough time. Primarily because I think ideally it was to be set up, fort, right? Don't spend a lot of money. That's why they didn't get much money, which irritated Senator Gillibrand, right?
Right.
Really not much to do, right? It's not much.
Yeah, what?
Study the issue. Blue Book, it studied the issue from 1952 to 69, 17 years. They had a massive number of cases. But most people don't know that. So no, it's not. It's just to sit there and wait for the game to start.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the game got a little too intense sooner than they wanted, and that's Grush. So when David Grush comes on the scene and blows the whistle publicly in a way that was pretty convincing, yeah, we got non-human bodies and non-human tech. In other words, David Grush basically did an informal disclosure, not the formal disclosure, not the one that's going to change the world, but he was the first person under oath to say there's non-human tech here and non-human bodies. And I'm pretty sure they weren't manufactured in Detroit and their ancestors didn't evolve on this planet. Others had done it. Gordon Cooper had said that. Bigelow had said that. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell had said it. Gary Nolan had said it. Tim Burchett had said it.
Oh, no.
That's not the same thing as a Air Force officer with an intel background that is working in the UAP task force saying it under oath. That was a big deal and a problem, because the moment that happened, who do you think was going to start getting a lot of emails and whatever and questions about Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick? Of course. And what could Dr. Kirkpatrick say about that? Nothing.
Why is that?
Because he is the head of AARO, and if he starts to get into it, that accelerates this whole thing. And
Right.
They weren't ready for that. They were not ready to go there yet, right? This is a process that is still in play to get to somewhere where the president can operate and talk about it publicly. And that, I say publicly, and the truth embargo. And that's going to require a major hearing along the line of the Nixon hearings, Rand-Contra hearings. Well, those were all negative stuff. This is very positive. When Grush came forward, he was in an impossible position. So his decision was to attack Grush, hoping that he could hold things off. That blew up in his face. Somebody somehow was able to release Grush's medical records, which they felt could undermine Grush because of issues that he had to deal with after returning from two terms of service to our country in Iraq. That blew up in their face. And so the situation just got worse and worse for Dr. Kirkpatrick. And ultimately, he realized, I've got to get out of here, and I don't blame him. And so he indicated he's resigning from AARO. Okay, fine. That's all right. So things continue to go forward. And then after Grush, things got even worse for AARO and the Department of Defense. As I say, they're losing. They cannot win this. They're going to be mated in about 3 or 4 moves. They know it, but they won't turn their king over. And that Schumer makes his move. Grush comes forward on June the 5th. Schumer comes forward and makes his major move on July the 14th, 39 days later. And that's when he informs the world that the new legislation for the 25 NDAA is going to be an act like the previous two, the UAP Disclosure Act. I think the name of that kind of says everything, doesn't it? Yes. And this act was everything needed, the entire package, to in fact execute the unveiling of, in a responsible, appropriate way, everything in the government's hands as well as the defense contractor hands to the world. Everything, the documents, the programs, the USAPs, the bodies, the tech, everything. And they knew it. And by say they knew it. And this was a major shock to the system. And they, at this point, started to panic and start making bad moves, which is how you win chess games. You make a move and the person gets upset and worried and they start making bad moves to save themselves. And it doesn't work. And when Schumer does that, the situation for Kirkpatrick just got even worse because Schumer is the Senate Majority Leader. He just put the entire gravitas of the Senate Majority Leader, a member of the Gang of 8 with the highest level security clearances, on the table. And so that ultimately is what ensured that he would resign, and he did. And so they thought they had a win, But no, after that, Senator Schumer and Mike Rounds go into the Senate and read into the record that they're not done. They'll be coming back. They're going to deal with this, in which case the DOD panicked big time. They're going, my God, what are we going to do? And then, of course, Warner could always hold a hearing as the chairman of the Intel Committee. He could bring in 20 witnesses anytime he wanted to, put those in front of that committee for a week and blow the whole thing up. And he's chosen not to, but he could. And so they really panicked. And what they did was, this is a Hail Mary pass that didn't get caught in the end zone like the one that the Hail Mary pass. Essentially, they whipped together and finalized a, quote, study report for AARO, meaning this is what's happened. This is what AARO has accomplished going back to the beginning, not the mandated annual report, which they just put out. And this thing was structured to make a very important case that there's no there. We didn't find anything. We investigated every case back to 47. It's a giant lie.
Right.
Okay. It's really the Condon report of the 21st century. And they put that out there. And unfortunately, they needed somebody to sign it. Like the Condon report was signed off on by Edward Condon, a professor at the University of Colorado. And they had a whole lot of leverage on Dr. Kirkpatrick, so he signed it. And they put that out there and hoped that it would shut things down. It didn't. All right. AARO now is in trouble. It's getting some serious shade directed at it online. And so Gillibrand, who created AARO through the legislation, made a very appropriate move. She said, okay, I'm going to call the new director up on the Hill to do a briefing to me, essentially, under the aegis of the Armed Services Committee. They announced that, but it's very notable that there was a private meeting ahead of time, nothing shocking about that, and then a public meeting. She didn't have to do a public meeting and just brought him up and done a briefing. The public component was specifically so everybody, and it was filmed, would see it. But notably, the private meeting before the public meeting wasn't just a private meeting in another office somewhere in the Senate building. It was a SCIF, sensitive compartmented information facility. So here is my sense of this. Again, I wasn't in it, so I don't know for sure, but I will assume that some very interesting and important questions were asked in that SCIF that were not asked in the public version. I can speculate if I were in that SCIF, what I would ask the new director, Kozlowski, sir, what is your opinion of the AARO study report that was released a while back? What are your intentions going forward? All right. What do you think about the Grush testimony and so forth? Get a real handle on where he is and what he knows. A lot of questions that quite simply could not be asked in public. Okay. And then you have the public version. As it happens, it was announced late, so it wasn't so hard to get into this one, right? Much bigger room too.
You were there yesterday?
Oh yeah, sure. And it was filmed. I think it was live streamed. I think CNN was there. I don't think it was filmed by as many venues, but it's out there. And I will be putting up links to that and sending them out to my list. But eventually, plenty of people are going to see this hearing. It's pretty tame. All right.
Right.
He gives a statement. The statement makes it clear that there are some things that they can't account for, but they're able to account for most of them, referring to AARO and what it was doing prior to him taking over. He goes out of his way to explain a couple of the well-known sightings and say, we've done some very sophisticated analysis, and they showed that the go fast was a true anomaly. I wasn't convinced, but made the case. And he indicated another event, but he also pointed out one of the events they can't explain, and he describes it. And let me tell you, the fact that he even mentioned it means that they haven't dismissed it. And in the description of the event that and people will go watch it and see that he described, it's not one that's going to have a prosaic explanation, I assure you. And so that was his way. In other words, this game is still underway. It is a tricky game, but I understand why it's going on. And so he debunks a couple of known events that are, clearly not obvious. And maybe it's true. Maybe they've explained it with some sophisticated analysis. But then he mentions, here's one we can explain, and he describes it. And I'm going, I can understand why you can't explain that. All right. And so again, he's letting you know, yeah, we know where we got to go. But obviously, there's a process underway. And so I was okay with it. Susan Gow was there sitting behind them as there were some people observing in their side of the hearing. We were further back in the public section. A lot has been made of that. She is the spokesperson for, I believe Susan Gow was there. I think they got it right. She's a spokesperson for the Pentagon, which is fine. A lot of people are mad at her because she says things that they don't like. And I'm going, don't get mad at Ms. Gow. She's not writing these things. She's not the one that decides what the Pentagon's going to say. She just says what the Pentagon tells her to say.
Right.
She's the spokesperson, people. Chill out. All right. When it was done, Senator Gillibrand stayed around. And a couple of people approached her. Ron James approached her. I was able to talk to her. Okay. And I was able to let her know that a set of the nuclear weapons tamper witnesses is in her office. All right. So that was important.
This was yesterday.
Yesterday. Let's just say that from the outside looking in, what you pick up on with X or social media is, I'm glad the massive attention to all of this through social media is critical, and another reason why the truth embargo hasn't got a chance. But that realm is very messy, complicated.
Yes.
So I get it. But based upon because I'm office next to the White House, I got a pretty good idea of the general picture, and that's what I'm trying to provide.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to have you on.
The general picture is clear. In spite of a potential nuclear event in Ukraine, in spite of one of the most complicated political transitions the history of the country is underway, in spite of all of the stuff that's going on, serious people, good people, from both sides of our political aisle are moving this thing towards the ultimate conclusion. And that is going to be disclosure from the president. And now I'm going to give you what I believe is going to happen next. I feel pretty good about this. I'm always positive, by and large, though there have been several times when I've gone public and said, this thing is derailed. The train just left the tracks. It's going to take a long time to get them back on the track. But mostly, I'm always looking for the silver lining, as it were. Right now, things are pretty straightforward. We're not going back, right? The efforts by the DOD to mess with the legislation ultimately failed. To mess with AARO has ultimately failed. What's going to happen? First, there is still time to get disclosure in this administration. Plenty of time. The new Congress doesn't start till January 3. It will be basically the same Congress as before, except that the Republicans have taken over the Senate as well by about 6 votes. And in terms of this issue, that's not that big a deal. In terms of other issues, it is a big deal. The new president doesn't take over until January 20. The Intelligence Committee or the Armed Services Committee of the Senate can hold a hearing anytime they want. Now, there is talk about, well, we need more witnesses to come forward. I understand we need to get witness protection. There is some already, but other bills are being submitted. Burchett has submitted a witness protection bill. Danny Sheehan is working on another witness protection bill. That's all fine and dandy, but let me say, there are plenty of witnesses. They don't need any more witness protection. They are ready to come forward, including the nuclear weapons tampering. And so we can have that hearing in the Senate, the one that ends this. And my description is pretty straightforward. 20 witnesses, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 5 days, that's it. And the viewership will be massive worldwide, I assure you. Massive worldwide. Assuming the media gives out the feeds, and they're going to do that. So NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all of them are going to give out the free feed to all the foreign coverage. And that means it's going to go out worldwide to the English-speaking world. It's a pretty big world. They can go everywhere. They'll caption it, whatever. The point is that they can hold that hearing in it's December. Plenty of time. And when they do, President Biden will be able to step forward, confirm that he's convinced, his chief aides are convinced, and yes, clearly, we're not alone, and obviously a whole lot more about that's going to come out. And that's it. He's the disclosure president. He will then soon leave the office, and his political influence will be minimal. And then the next president takes over about a month later. Now, here's why this is important. If we get disclosure now, then we will already be in the post-disclosure world for almost a month by the time the new administration takes over, meaning it's done. Other heads of state will have already confirmed it, many. How many, I don't know, but quite a few, pretty much almost all the major countries, though China and Russia are wild cards. I'd be shocked if they didn't do it as well, but whatever. And so we're in the post-disclosure world for a whole month when the new president takes over. In other words, that's done. And now the next president will, in fact, be the first president to formulate policy and address all of the aspects and demands of the post-disclosure world, along with everything else. And connect that post-disclosure world, possibly, to the solutions needed to deal with the mess that we are in. But that's a pretty formidable legacy. And it'll be a lot easier. If we do not get disclosure before the inauguration, then that whole issue of disclosure and the process underway and everything about it is going to be hanging over everything else. It's not going to go away. And this is going to make things more difficult. Now, the new president would also get the legacy of being the disclosure president, as well as the first president to engage the post-disclosure world. History will spend a lot of time talking about that, but it's not the best for the United States of America. Will it happen? I believe so. If we don't get it before the inauguration, I think we get it within 60 days of the inauguration, which puts it in late March. Why? There are 4 reasons, and they're not trivial. All right. 1, the president-elect has been asked about this issue more than any other presidential candidate, or the only presidential candidate or president that's been asked about this issue more would be Secretary of State Hillary Clinton during her race for the presidency. So the current president has been asked quite often. His responses have always been a bit casual, short, nothing overly substantive, but he didn't say, this is ridiculous, this is nonsense.
Well, he says he knew a lot.
Yeah, and he's also
said,
he said a number of things. He doesn't elaborate, but he gives these short answers. Noted. That's number 1. Number 2, okay, there are people in his immediate circle we know of that it's been reported that they've brought it up. In other words, independent of anybody asking the president-elect a question, they have brought it up. In other words, people in his circle are already trying to tee him up to do this. That's a pretty good reason. Reason number 3, the new administration, or the president and his campaign, has made reforming what they often refer to as the deep state, all right, as a major part of their agenda. Now, the deep state is a term I don't like. I don't think it defines anything. It's too messy. But most people know what he's talking about. The deep state is primarily the military intelligence complex and its entire structure of secrecy and so forth, and policies and laws. There is, of course, the defense contractors, who are also heavily shielded. And there are other aspects that you could add to this that you would include in the name deep state. But for me, he's going to address, essentially, he's saying, I'm going to address the dysfunctions of the vast military intelligence complex. Obviously, the presence of extraterrestrials and the truth embargo is right in the heart of the military intelligence complex. And so therefore, it should be right in the bullseye where they're going. So that's number 3. And the 4th reason why I would place my bets on no later than the end of March is that, unlike President Obama, unlike President Bush, unlike President Biden, unlike presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, he will do whatever he wants, period. No matter what his advisors are saying, no matter what the law might say, he will do whatever he wants. And that's non-trivial. And so if he wants to disclose, it will happen one way or the other. And I think he's probably aware now that if he likes getting attention from media, from people in general, not just in the United States, but worldwide, nothing will surpass that. Then it comes down to how. There are two ways probably this will go down. The way that I would recommend and counsel, should my counsel ever be called on, which I don't think so was going to happen, is that the new president should immediately let the now Republican-chaired Senate Intel Committee or Republican-chaired Armed Services Committee in the Senate bring in the witnesses. All right? Bring in those 20. Select the best 20 of the probably 40 or more that have come forward. Don't wait for the witness potential list to get up to 150. You don't need that. And hold that hearing. 1 week, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. And when that hearing is over, you can come right out in the East Run and basically say, see, told you, right? That's why I called for that hearing. We're not alone. We have non-human entities visiting us, engaging us, and where they're from could be considered an unknown. For me, it's obvious that they're from the stars. That's disclosure. That's the way to do it. Could be done and again, that hearing is only going to take 1 week. Take a week to set it up. Right? Send them some airfare, get them a hotel, bring them in, boom, it's done. The other way, this is not out of the question, is the unilateral approach. He just simply walks out in the White House, East Room, puts out a press release. The media will pack that room, big announcement. And he simply says, I'm here to tell you that we have a non-human presence here. We have an extraterrestrial presence. We're not alone. There you go. That's disclosure. You don't have to have the hearings. Disclosure. The moment those words come out of the mouth of a president of the United States or another head of state, that is disclosure, capital D, period. It's over. It's done. We're in the post-disclosure world. Now, that's a different approach, okay? So it's more likely that many people will question it without that hearing. They'll challenge it. It's possible that a number of head of states will delay confirming it themselves. They're going to stand back for a while, not sure what's going on here. This is a unique man. We've never had a president quite like him. But that'll do the job. That'll happen. So that's my take on what to expect between now and end of March.
Yeah, Steve, that's an unbelievable synopsis there. I had a list of questions here I was going to ask you. But you basically answered all of them.
Really? All of them?
You basically answered all of them about what it was like in that room. I was going to ask you about the Senate hearings yesterday that I watched last night. It is streaming on YouTube and other places, so you can go and watch that. The Senate hearings are much more reserved.
It was a briefing, not a hearing.
Briefing. The Senate briefing with Dr. John Kozlowski. It seemed like they were just taking the temperature of AARO, and I think some of the most significant parts of that is when he talked about those 3 unresolved cases, and one of those is they're not going to resolve that case. People can go watch it, but they're not going to resolve that case. If that's as accurate as the way he was depicting it, they're not going to resolve that case. That is truly anomalous. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about Immaculate Constellation that Michael Schellenberger brought to the table, and then we can wrap this up. So that document I read through, there's very telling, very detailed descriptions of cases that will never be resolved. That is truly anomalous cases in there. Sure. Do you see that individual, not Michael Schellenberger, but his source, do you see that individual coming forward to testify? Is that something that could happen?
As always, this is never simple. The route that Grush took to finally end up in front of the House committee was a 2-year, I think it was 2-year deal. He gets that information, he goes to the Senate Intel Committee, and he goes to AARO, and then he starts getting harassed, and he has to go to the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, et cetera. It was a long time. It's not simple. This is the same thing. This is more problematic than the Grush path. The Grush path, he followed pretty much all the rules, and because he was getting threatened and his family's getting threatened, he said, this is enough, and he goes public. This is not like that. This is somebody whose name we don't know stumbled on a highly classified document whose we have not seen, right? and makes a decision, I want to get this out to the world. If he had access to the document, he could have. One choice was to just get that whole document out and do a WikiLeaks kind of thing, right? Put it out. But instead, he decided to give it to a journalist. Okay, fine. It's not clear whether he wrote a summary of it, and maybe this is known, and I just don't know it yet. It's hard to keep up. It's not. He may have written a summary above it and given that to Schellenberger. It may be that all he saw was a summary of it, but I get the sense he actually saw the actual document. If he saw the actual document and he had turned that over, that is a much more dangerous move. You are giving a top secret document to somebody. And so down the line, you could be facing some serious charges. There is a young kid who just a very immature young kid that decided to get a bunch of documents out into his gaming group. He's only 20 years old. Big mistake. And now he just got sentenced to 20 years in prison.
What is this story?
Somebody, the Texaria story. The kid that who was working and had classified access and got a lot of documents, and he put them out online to his gaming group.
Yes.
And he was eventually, it took a couple of years, but he was just finally sentenced to 20 years. So, and didn't do that. So Schellenberger comes forward, and ultimately Coulthard as well, and presents this to the world. And what we know is it's a USAP called Immaculate constellation. Grush did not come forward with the name of a USAP. He just came forward and said, somebody in a USAP confirmed to me that we have non-human tech, non-human bodies. They're working on that. Okay. But this is the name that they named a USAP. The Department of Defense did not like that. All right. That is not good. All right.
It's probably also important to note that Michael Schellenberger corroborated this with non-connected separate sources that he deemed credible.
In other words, he is a legitimate investigative journalist, all right? And so now he's going to corroborate it in his own way. And if he is able to, obviously, better story. I assume Coulthard probably made an effort himself to find corroboration. Both of these gentlemen came forward with that story. And if it's not true, they're going to have a problem on their hands. But I think it is true. And so this is the deal, right? This is why the truth embargo is doomed. So they expended a lot of capital pushing back on the UAP in bill, right? They expended a lot of capital to get rid of eminent domain and also to undermine the next bill. And now they got to deal with this. And so essentially, the best they could come up with this time was to see if they could intimidate Representative Nancy Mace. Didn't work. All right. And so they're stuck with it. Now, I don't know what's going to happen next on that. All right. Except that is now on the record of the House. Right. And it's not going to ever leave that record. And it's in play. It is inviting others to possibly come forward to journalists. In other words, once the dam starts to break, it doesn't unbreak. It just gets bigger and bigger until the whole thing collapses. So the national defense world, the military intelligence complex, has got to make a decision. Do we get to high ground here and really get behind this process, which will get us a lot of kudos from the American people? Or do we continue to stand in front of that dam and just shake our fingers at it and hope that somehow some magic voodoo will put the dam back together instead of collapsing and we all drown? This is what they're dealing with. However, one could make a case that if you consider all the things that have happened and didn't happen over the last few years, they're not going to take this all the way to the mat. They're trying to slow it, but the idea that they're somehow going to do something draconian to save the day and keep the truth embargo going another 10 years, 15 years, I just, they're not losing well, but they are losing.
Yeah. It seems like it's too late for that. One last thing before I let you go, Steve. We didn't talk about this, but I think it's something that maybe should be put out there. But the sightings they're not going away. In fact, the sightings of these anomalous sightings seem to be increasing. Is that being taken into account? We've talked a lot about the political process here and these witnesses coming forward. But one thing that I don't think people are understanding is that the sightings seem to be increasing, and they can't all be Lockheed's secret ARV vehicle going around there. Some of these have to be something else. Why would you keep showing your special tech? It doesn't make any sense. So
Yeah.
that's a problem. And so is that being acknowledged? Are people understanding that, hey, somebody might get a very clear video of something so big and so strange that it may be difficult to debunk? So is that conversation being had?
The amount of sightings being reported by people in the media and everything else seems to be increasing. But it's hard to know if that's just because people are so now engaged in the issue.
Right.
More. Everybody's
Right.
looking at the sky and everybody's reporting, at least I say reporting. It's mostly the news coverage is really.
Right. They see
But
Starlink, they think it's something anomalous.
Yeah, I assume MUFON's continue to get reports, but MUFON's got 120,000 reports. But yeah, there seems to be more of this. Fine. But is that simply because the people are more into it now or because the ETs have escalated their activity? I happen to think it's because the ETs have escalated their activity. I happen to think the ETs know exactly what they're doing, that this is their way to push this along, but that's just my view. But one of the most recent developments in the sighting category is pretty cool, right? And again, if I'm a DOD truth embargo guy, I'm going, oh man, give us a break. Drone swarms. They're late.
Right.
It was drone swarms.
Hanging over Langley for several days.
Yeah.
And
Around
not
our
doing
ships.
anything and not doing anything about it.
Drone swarms around our ships. Here's the problem there. Let's just make this very basic. We are very serious about our national security and our ships. So any not identified things of any kind, motorboats, skiffs, airplanes, drones, or anything else, start cruising around our ships at sea. What happens is that they're given a dignified amount of time to clearly identify who they are, or we basically blow them to smithereens. Period. Trust me on this. Don't get in a motorboat or go to get some fishing boat and go out and try to really annoy a U.S. destroyer. Keep bumping into it, yelling at them. At some point, you're gone. And so these drone swarms are happening, and they're apparently not able to do anything about it. Really? Okay. And so why is that? There's several reasons. Now, recently, another video showed up, which is out there. I'm just trying to catch up here. I haven't looked at it, but supposedly this is a video of them trying to shoot down these drones. Now, again, in the modern era, I tell you, there's a lot of people out there that could put this video together and the whole thing's a fake. But if it's real, it makes sense. Because these drones, if they are not ours, are going to be destroyed. They are not, either because they can't or they won't. Now, apparently this video indicates they may have tried, and it indicates it didn't work. Okay? Okay, what's going on here? Here's my interpretation. Very simple. This is ET. They call them drones. Now let's be clear. What is a drone? It's an unpiloted anything flying around, whether it's the size of a baseball or the size of a Boeing 777. If it's unpiloted, it's a drone. Okay. Now everybody has an idea in their head of what a drone is, but whatever. If you're talking about, they're saying. They're calling them drones because obviously they think they don't have pilots. Now, in some cases, it's obvious because they're very small, but some of the things being reported could contain a pilot, but they seem to be drones. If they're extraterrestrial, which I happen to think they are, you don't shoot at them because overall, it's best not to do that. They've learned a few things over the years. Right? And they know full well that there's ETs here. They know full well their capabilities, and they know full well that technically, if they really wanted to, they could blow that, they could sink that destroyer so fast, right? Boom, it's gone. And that would be bad. All right. So you don't do that. You don't shoot at them because if you do, you're going to have a bunch of non-human tech, all of it floating in the ocean. Or if you're talking about a base, you got non-human tech falling into people's backyards and stuff. That's not helpful. That's a loss. That's not a win. Okay, you can't do that either. All right, so you got a problem. And if the ETs want to keep doing this, they can drive the DoD and the Air Force crazy. And so I believe that this is a message. Just as the nuclear weapon shutdown witnesses believe what happened there was a message. Not see how we can harass your destroyers or see how we can shut your missiles down. Man, boy, we can take you out anytime we want. No. A message. Look, let's get on with this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get on with this. Look, we have an agenda here that we would like to continue proceeding with. We feel it's in maybe even your best interest, but with all these destroyers and nuclear submarines and nuclear missiles ready to launch at any time, that's we need to get past that. You need to get rid of the nukes. You need to rethink what you're doing. And so we're letting you know, we're sending you a message that in the grander scheme of things, which includes multiple other civilizations, which you might learn about formally if you get off your ass, that like these things are trivial. They can ruin your world. They can't ruin ours, at least not now. And so think about it. This is what the witnesses think. This is what ETs have been told. This is what school children have been told in the presence of ETs who have landed near. I could go on.
Right.
I'd like to have some of the Ruah witnesses and Westall witnesses, some of these kids that are now in their 50s, to come in and sit down and testify, but that'll happen later.
I think that conversation is going to happen much later because there's one thing to talk about craft, drones, things flying around, sensitive spaces. Face-to-face contact is the abduction phenomenon. I think these are conversations I'm not sure I don't think people are there yet, but coming.
The military intelligence complex is not there yet. The political people, I think, could go there. The O'Hare airport deal. You got a saucer that's literally hanging over the airport for quite a while, gets seized by a lot of people, and then boom, goes up straight through the clouds. Why is it over the airport? Why the hell even bother? What are they checking out the flight schedules? And then boom, it's gone. But now it becomes a major incident in a case and it's written up. It can't be avoided. It's been seen by so many people. Let me just suggest that's just another little message. The extraterrestrials have played a very clear, obvious, and important role in ensuring that in spite of all the foo-fa going on down here, that the process leading to disclosure is going to continue. It is not going to go backwards. And why they do this remains to be seen. Their agenda and timing, we do not know. We can only speculate. But that it is happening that way is quite clear. And so, again, once you start viewing things like that, it becomes a little less confusing. If you focus on just one thing, if you focus on just one tree in the forest, you're not going to be able to get the bigger picture. And so people are going to get all worked up about the drone swarms. Oh my God, and this and that and everything else. And I'm saying, look, after disclosure, let's ask the DoD, what do you know about the drone swarms? And if they say, I'm still not quite sure what was going on there. And I say, after open contact, let's ask ETs about the drone swarms. But let's don't go nuts about it. Let's just point out that like those things suddenly are the new game in town. They probably have a few more tricks up their sleeve because the disclosure activist movement includes citizen researchers, activists, journalists, contactees, witnesses, documentarists. It also now includes professional journalists, members of Congress, retired personnel, and it includes the extraterrestrials themselves. That's what the truth embargo managers are now up against. And they absolutely have lost, and they just can't turn their king over. They can't. What you're supposed to do when you know you are absolutely going to be checkmated is you turn your king over and shake the hands of your adversary. But some players, knowing they're in mate, still force you to move all the moves until they mate. And then they close. Or sometimes they'll throw the board up in the air, whatever. They've lost. They need to accept that and end this so we can move forward. I cannot say that message enough. So hopefully that's what's going to happen. And one of the reasons it's going to happen is the internet, social media, the podcast revolution, which is just another extension of technology and social media that I'm sure they didn't see coming 20 years ago. I don't know how many podcasts there are now. I've heard numbers around 7 million. Influencers are also another factor. The term existed 40 years ago, but not the way it's used now. Influencer is a modern name for just citizens who are able to use the internet to have so many people paying attention to them that they become an influencer. And you may say, yeah, there are such people out there. There's always been people like that, not like this. And so if you've got a 17-year-old out there that's smart and engaging and some clever and starts putting out some TikTok videos, and a couple of years later, they've got 40 million followers, I assure you, that's a modern phenomenon. That is not something that can happen 50 years ago, 40 years, 30 years ago. It is a phenomenon now. And the next thing, they've got a podcast, and the next thing, they are then creating problems for the political establishment. This is now at a level that's almost impossible to imagine. And so when you have a single individual, and I'm not getting partisan here, really, who has so many followers, 90 million, and I'm referring to Taylor Swift, whatever you think of her, where you've got both parties hoping that she'll endorse one or the other, your party, right? That is not 1969. And so there are a lot of influencers out there that know about this issue. Let's just say that they'll be surprised if you start seeing some of that happening, right? There are podcasters. Let me put it this way, you're already seeing it happening. And a perfect example is one of the biggest influencers of all, and that's Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is not afraid of this issue. He has brought people on to discuss this issue. Joe Rogan has tens and tens of millions of followers. He's got one major platform. He's got other sites. It's multiple platforms.
It's the biggest media platform on the planet.
Joe Rogan can decide to take this as far as he wants to. He could make this every third show. He could engage this issue. He's already engaged it. He's brought it up. And so again, the truth embargo is facing down Joe Rogan. Joe's going to win. And there's more Joe Rogan. It's another world. And I just keep saying, guys, I understand you're good people. You have careers, long careers, and working at the Pentagon, in our Army, in our Navy, at the CIA. You want to protect the country. You're not evil. I'm on your side in a sense. But continuing to keep this truth embargo is a mistake. It is going to undermine your country. It's going to undermine your legacy. So it's time to decide. Are you going to step up? And I'm sure that if enough people within the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies were to let it be known internally in proper channels and run that up to the White House, that look, let's get this over with, that will almost certainly do it. So again, if everybody's got to start picking, it's time to pick a side. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're the Pope, if you're a head of state, the leader of a major military, whatever the hell, it's time to pick a side. You are either in favor of ending this embargo or you opposed. Just sitting there and going, I don't know what to do. Then why are you in the job you're in? Quit, retire, go off somewhere, go to Boca Raton, go to Italy, enjoy yourself, enjoy your final years. But don't sit there in these positions of power and authority and not decide what we need to do. So you can either continue to fight the truth embargo or you can end it. But just sitting there and watching what goes on I wouldn't want to have to be reflecting back on that in my final years. This is the biggest event in human history. This is not something you sit out.
Steve, I really want to thank you for coming back on and illuminating myself and my audience about what it was like in those hearings and where you see this going. I hope you're right. I hope that we get that capital D here in December before the transition takes place. Before we go, again, tell people how they can find you, your website, and everything else.
Support the Soul Foundation, the new science think tank out of Stanford. Support the UAP Disclosure Fund, the 501c4 political organization out of San Francisco. Support the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, a 501c3 networking entity that I founded with Dan Harari a year ago that's based in Hollywood. Support the Paradigm Research Group, which is now a nonprofit, but I haven't got my funding module up, but I'll get it up in a few days. And boy, what are the other organizations? There's more that are forming all the time. There is an emerging group of organizations literally gearing up to address the post-disclosure world, which, by the way, is when things really get going. You think ending the truth embargo is like a big deal? You haven't seen anything yet. After the truth embargo ends and we enter the post-disclosure world, then you're going to see a big deal, right? Unlike anything the world has ever seen, and you'll be part of it. Support these organizations. Follow them if they have social media accounts. Follow Paradigm Research Group on Twitter. You can't have too many followers. I've learned that. That way you can be involved. So that's my promos for today. I'd also go to the conferences if you can and support them. Until next time, Ad Astra.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it.
All righty. Bye.
Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. If you're finding any value, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps out the show.